Well, guys, we have made it through, and then there were none. I know that you guys were hoping that there would be some sort of survivor, and of course, uh, we know there is not. They have all perished in one way or another. And you all know who done it now, who UNON is. So let's dive into our last chapters 15 and 16, and then the epilogue and manuscript. So a lot happens in a very short period of time in these four kind of sections of the last part of our novel. So let's dig in. So last we left off, there are three people left in the house, and Armstrong has gone AWOL. He is missing. And Vera has stayed behind while Lombard and Bloor go in search of him, and they're convinced that he is no longer in the house. So, no avail. He cannot be found, and that's where we pick up with chapter 15, and it's a new day. Where am I here? Here we are. Okay. It is a new day, and they're in the kitchen having breakfast. Remember, that's kind of that reestablishment of stability. And notice that outside the weather has changed. And the storm is over, the sun is shining, and I think it's important really to note this change in weather. The weather really kind of mimics the change in situation, the change in the characters, all that kind of thing. So the storm is over, and Christy explains that this change in weather has a change in the mood of our prisoners on the island. And this attention to the weather is really interesting. Remember, it's stormy. It's not yet storming, but it's kind of that ominous threat of a storm before MacArthur dies, and that calm before the chaotic storm, so to speak. It's dark, everything is unknown, and this idea of sunlight could indicate safety. Theoretically, Frank Narcott can now come and they'll all be rescued. But in some ways, it's a false sense of hope and security. The sunshine, the lights, also can be symbolic of revelations, of knowledge, and the ability to see things or people for who they really are. And really, there are some revelations that happen in the light, so to speak, especially with Philip Lombard. He sees Vera for who she very clearly is, but kind of too late. So this break in the weather also gives them the freedom to move in a way that they weren't able to during the storm. They can actually move from the inside and go looking the exterior of the house. And I think this is a beautiful quote, that paralyzing atmosphere of fear that wrapped around them like a blanket while the wind howls outside is gone. And Lombard is the first one to take advantage of this opportunity. And they are able to move to the outside of the house. And I think that it really is symbolic here that they are moving outside. It is not confining like the house or the kind of interior. And if you look at the symbolic nature of the house being this kind of emblem of civility, of domestication, so to speak. It's really kind of interesting when we look at the kind of de-evolution of our characters as they become more like animals. And what don't animals do? They don't want to be inside. In the outside, they are free. So Philip Lombard, he goes outside. They all go outside to put to kind of see, scope out the situation. And Lombard puts his survival skills in motion and plans to send out rescue signals. But just because the weather is on their side, the sea is still dangerous. And despite there being 3 soldiers, possibly 4, there's still this question of what happened to Armstrong. So I do want to mention that they are in the light, they are outside, and in some ways that's kind of freeing and enlightening. Vera says that the daylight gives her a sense of power and control that she didn't have inside and in the house, and even like throughout the last part of the couple of chapters, she's like, I don't want to go back inside. I can't stay in there another day. And if you think about the house as well, who's in the house? It's all of the dead bodies, and it's August, so even in this stormy kind of weather, dead bodies tend to stink after a while. So the house is kind of this tomb as well, of the dead, and the outside is kind of for the living in that regard. So I want to take an opportunity to look at our final 4. And we know that we have Armstrong somewhere, we assume, is still out there. Bloor is left, Lombard is left, and Vera is left. And those are our final 4. And if we look at, I want to talk. I don't want to talk too much about Armstrong, just yet. But Bloor, Lombard, and Vera, they all assume that Armstrong is out there somewhere and that he is the culprit. And I want to talk a little bit about Bloor. Remember, he is our kind of wild boar, our detective, and not a very good one. And because he's called this kind of wild boar, we get the sense that he could possibly physically be threatening and dangerous, but he's dumb. Right? That's why he can't be the killer. He lacks that imagination, at least according to Philip Lombard. And part of what so as Bloor is this kind of detective, like we said, we know that he's not a very good one. And part of it is because he still thinks that Philip Lombard is our UNON. And of course, Philip is the most obvious of choices. And we get in the manuscript that he's supposed to be the one that everybody is suspicious of. And part of what Bloor can't get over is this fact that there is this revolver, and he, despite the fact that only one person has been killed, we think, using the revolver, he can't get this out of his brain. So he's kind of limited in the fact that he can't put it all together. So Lombard, our kind of bad boy, Panther-esque, shady anti-hero. He's the one that's most likely to survive because he's been through kind of some tight spots in his experiences, and he relies very much on those instincts. In some ways, he is or was the most animal-like from the beginning. And in a lot of ways, that instinct is kind of taken by these very civilized human relationships and human connections. And we know he's been the most honest and the most transparent and the most, I don't want to say trustworthy, because I think that's not necessarily part of his character because I think that he is kind of shady, but he's the character that we should trust the most because he's been the most open from the beginning, and he is probably the most perceptive in terms of who he suspects all along. And the only thing that he's not too perceptive about is Vera. And that brings me to Vera, whose name ironically means true. And she still suspects Armstrong because she's so connected to this poem. But there's still this sense, and we get in the opening of chapter 15, she still kind of gets this sense that this whole thing is a game. And it's a game that she describes the murderer as this kind of horrible child, not unlike how she feels about Cyril in some ways, playing a game. So in a lot of ways, to me, and you might seem different, might see things differently, that she is still kind of that target of all of this. So I also want to mention, and I know I've been talking a really long time about these final four, I do want to mention that in our final four, we have the remainder of what are two of our three kind of core alliances from the very beginning. We, of course, have that alliance between Vera and Lombard, but also Bloor, Armstrong, and Lombard are that kind of initial alliance of the three guys who go out and look. And I mean, they're the strong, capable, bright men who should be able to kind of put their minds together. I mean, if they were all work together, they could probably do something great. But alas, we have Armstrong, who is kind of that unpredictable factor, because who does he have? Who's the one person who is in his confidence that is no longer with us? And it's Justice Wargrave. So I want to come back to that in a second. So we have our final four, and they are outside. They are kind of looking for a way out, and they are kind of on their guard for Armstrong. So while we are kind of navigating through looking for Armstrong and signaling for people, sending out the SOS and all that kind of thing, we get some revelations outside of the house in the daylight, and most of that comes from Vera and Lombard. They're all suspicious of each other in a lot of ways, and once Bloor gives in to his animal instinct of hunger and goes back to the house to get something to eat, Lombard and Vera are left alone amongst themselves to their own devices, and Lombard is, I don't know, he's taken all of what he has, and he has thought, well, maybe UN Owen is Bloor, but Vera is very still much kind of convinced that Armstrong is our guy, because he's mad, he's crazy, and there's that connection again to the murderer and madness. But anyway, we get this conversation between them, and like all the conversations between the characters, this one is pretty revealing. There's this shaky level of trust between them, and they feel, or at least Vera feels, that someone is watching them, and she suggests that it could be supernatural. Remember that story that she talks about with the two judges that are not of this world, that come to judge people? I think it's in the States. But anyways, Lombard contributes this kind of paranoia and fear to her guilt, and automatically he realizes, oh my God, you did kill the kid, didn't you? And she denies that she's done this, and he's like, okay, fair enough, but I know you did this. And he says that there is a man involved. That's her kind of motive. But she denies that she had anything to do with Cyril's death. But she does admit that there was a man involved in that whole scenario. But um, Lombard has seen Vera's true self, much like General MacArthur did when they have that conversation about how he understands, he knows who she is and what she is. And this ability of Lombard to see who she is, it doesn't give her this kind of feeling of security. And keep in mind, Vera has consistently gone out of her way to hide who she really is, hide her true self, even from her own, even from herself. Like, she can't admit it to herself. We only get that kind of view into her through her own memories. But despite this fact that Lombard sees that she, yes, is a murderer, he still continues to trust her and is convinced that Blore is our man until they feel the earth shake and look towards the house, and we find Blore dead, and he is killed by being crushed. The clock, not the clock, but the bear, the marble bear that was on Vera's mantelpiece, has surreptitiously come through the window and crushed his head. And I picked these from the movie, even though they kind of depict the deaths in a little bit different manner. Blore is no more. Um, and in some regards, I guess in some regards, there's that symbolic view of his death of being, there's no more law, but um, Vlor wasn't much of a lawman to begin with. So it has to be Armstrong, right? That's the only conclusion that Vera and Lombard can make at this point. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to pick up and we're going to finish talking about the rest of our novel.